Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. It seems that one of the common difficulties people have is being overly self-critical, or putting it another way, underestimating themselves. It's common, I think, for people who take up Buddhist meditation to think that experiences like jhana are out of reach, they're unattainable, even more so reaching the stages of sotapanna and so on. And it's, I think, a very self-fulfilling prophecy that, with that attitude, you're not going to get anywhere. The reality is that human beings in general have a lot more potential than they ever realize or experience. There is, I think, not just in Buddhist practice, but generally in all endeavors of life, people tend to only reach a fraction of their potential. And a part of this, a large part of this, I think, is self-doubt. If you strongly believe that you can't do it, then you won't be able to do it. So it's always good to push your own envelope a little bit. Keep trying to grow. As long as you're either growing or you're falling back. There's really no standing still. And you should keep trying to improve your level of awareness, your level of samadhi, your level of consciousness. There's a concept in Mahayana Buddhism that they call Tathagata Garbha, which is the Buddha nature. That everybody has an inherent potential of Buddhahood. And in some sayings in Zen, for example, they say that all beings are Buddhas from beginningless time. It's just they don't realize it. You just don't realize your own Buddhahood or Buddha nature. In the Theravada, it's said in the Anguttara Nikaya that the citta is inherently luminous. And this is a important concept. It's one that the Thai forest tradition has made much of, the idea of the pure undefiled citta. The essence of existence is the citta, the consciousness, the knowing, and everything else is outside of that and secondary to that. And the citta, by its inherent nature, it cannot be purified or defiled. It just is as it is. So what keeps us from being inherently enlightened, inherently awakened, are the defilements. In Tibetan Buddhism, they have an image that's often used that's, I think, quite powerful, is the clear blue sky. The mind is the clear blue sky. So even on a cloudy day and the darkest clouds in the sky, the clear blue sky is still there behind the clouds. And the only thing that keeps you from seeing the clear blue sky are the clouds, which represent the defilements, the darker states of mind. The condition of being an embodied being in samsara is that we're caught up in the manifestations. We're caught up in the forms. As human beings, we're part of the kama bhumi, the sense experience level of consciousness, and that's our default fallback level of consciousness for human beings, is to relate through the senses. So for beings at this level, most of their desires, their fears, their hopes, their thoughts all revolve around objects of sense. But the senses themselves are imperfect. They're only fragmentary windows onto reality. And in that sense, they're illusory. So this level of existence is inherently complex and confusing, and delusion takes hold of the mind. We're caught in delusions, and we're caught in desires, chasing after pleasant objects, pleasant experiences, and we're caught up in aversion and fear, trying to avoid unpleasant objects. Whereas the clear knowing of the citta is not caught in any of that. It knows those things as objects, but it's not affected by them. So you always have that potential, that option really, of falling back to the citta. When you're caught in mind states of confusion or fear or longing, regret, whatever kind of unpleasant and self-destructive mindset set in, you can always fall back into the citta, the clear knowing, and see those things merely as phenomena, as objects of consciousness. Even just a simple kind of mind trick, the cognitive maneuver of recognizing a state when a state arises like fear or anger, instead of relating to that as I am fearful or I am angry, just say here is anger, here is fear. Seeing it as an objective phenomena. And that immediately takes a lot of the power away from it. So you're not at that moment, you're not a fearful being or an angry being, you're a clear knowing being who can observe anger and fear as mind states. I like to compare this to these mind states as like the weather. If you're out in a raging blizzard with winds and blowing snow, it's a lot different than being sitting in a warm cabin with the fire on looking at it out the window. This is the difference between being centered in the citta and being lost in the mental formations. And whenever self-doubt or self-negativity arises, you can also remind yourself that you're already in an extraordinarily rare position as a human being. That the preciousness of human rebirth is something not to be diminished or negated. This again is something that's emphasized a lot in Mahayana Buddhism. They talk about the twin contemplations of the horrors of samsara and the preciousness of human rebirth. And I think both of those concepts come up actually with some frequency in Theravada teachings, but I've not seen them explicitly paired like that. And I think they actually do work together very well. There is contemplation of the horrors of samsara, to realize that continual wandering in samsara is a realm of suffering with some very dark corners in it. You can get some glimpses of that by observing nature. One of the strongest images I saw of that, of the horrors of samsara, was in Thailand, watching winged termites swarming out of their nest. And these are the mating form of the termites. Once a year they put forth these sexually active male and female termites that have wings that fly out of the nest and will often mate and do a mating dance in the air. And they're swarming out of this nest in huge numbers. And there's this really big, ugly toad sitting there, watching them come out, and he's just opening and shutting his mouth and swallowing them as they come out, making a noise like womp, womp. This is samsara and evidence here. Well, they're all dressed up for the prom, coming out of the nest there, end up in the belly of a toad. But the other side of that is the contemplation of the preciousness of human rebirth. This is something we can easily take for granted, because this is, well, we're human, we're born human, we have a human life, and there seems to be a lot of humans around, but as a total fraction, even of the organic life on this planet, human beings are only a tiny fraction. When you consider all the vast numbers of insects and worms and little creatures in the sea. Well, this is not even counting all the invisible realms of existence. So taking a human rebirth is already like winning a lottery, that you already have made that much karma, you already have that much potential, that you were able to take a human rebirth. And then it's only a fraction of humans that have the karma to be born in a time and place when the Buddha's teaching can be heard, and to have the opportunity and the wit to hear it, and put it into practice. So you've already come a very long way along the journey. Another aspect of this to bear in mind is our attitude towards what are called attainments or higher states of consciousness. Even by using that kind of language, sort of makes it seem out of reach or far away. But something like jhana is actually very natural. It's not a exotic, strange, beyond the pale sort of attainment. It's something the mind naturally settles into when the hindrances are suppressed or diminished or made quiescent is probably the best word. The hindrances being a particular subset of the defilements that particularly prevent the settling of the mind, which is really a way of thinking about jhana, the mind settling into its natural state when it's not distracted by the hindrances, being sense desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, worry, and skeptical doubt. Now, these are things that keep the mind busy and keep the mind divided against itself and distracted and moving around. Whereas when these things are not present, the mind is able to be still, which is the meaning of samadhi, stillness or stability. And the mind is not divided, it's unified, which is ekagata, the mind gone to unity. The kind of settling of the mind. And it unleashes that inherent potential that's there. It's really not something gained, something new. It's something that's potentially there all the time, but we're distracted from it. Something the same could be said of attaining to the stages of enlightenment, to becoming a stream winner, a sotapanna, is the mind realizing the unconditioned, experiencing a glimpse of nibbana. Nibbana is not something new that's created. It's uncreated. It's timeless. It's akaliko. So it's potentially always a mind moment away. The reason we don't realize it is because we keep grasping after phenomenal objects. That's a very ingrained habit of mine. I like to call it the primordial addiction, the mind wanting to take an object. It's such a habitual habit of the mind that it's not even noticed, or it's not considered even possible to have an option not to do that. So the first thing towards realizing the unconditioned, is to make the process of the conditioned fully conscious, which is the project of vipassana. Watching the process of mind at a very fine-grained level until you can see what's happening exactly, precisely, moment by moment. Then you can become disillusioned with it. You can see what a mug's game it is. You can see how the mind is grabbing an object, and the object is inherently flawed. It's dukkha, anicca, anatta, and it falls away. And the mind, instead of realizing, what's the point of this, it immediately jumps onto the next shiny thing. And when it's fully conscious, that can begin to run down. You begin to lose the impulse. And this is nibbida viraga nirodha. Nibbida is disenchantment, viraga is dispassion, and nirodha is cessation. So first you become disenchanted or disillusioned with the process. Then the passion or the drive for it fades, and then it stops. And when the process stops, it ceases, a cessation. When the conditioned process, when the samsaric process ceases, then what's left is the unconditioned, is nibbana. And that is within potential of human beings. It's said that this particular form of existence, being a human, is the ideal position from which it can be realized. In the lower realms it cannot be realized at all, and in the higher realms it's exceedingly difficult. It can happen, but it's difficult. Because in the lower realms they're so immersed in suffering and delusion that they can't really break free. And in the higher realms, like the Devas, they're so caught up in their pleasures that they don't feel any motivation. In the human realm, we have a balance of pleasure and pain. We have enough pain and suffering in the human life to remind us again and again that there is an issue, there is a problem here. But we have enough pleasure and, even more important, ease. We have some space. We're not constantly immersed in suffering. We have some space that we can do some of this exploration and some of this work, and this self-development. We have the potential or possibility. So you need to have, first of all, mindfulness to examine your own mind, to see what's holding you back. What are the defilements that are keeping you in bondage? What are the fetters that need to be broken? What is the particular nature of the clouds that are obscuring the bright, clear sky? And when you get occasional glimpses of the clear blue sky, to validate that and recognize that, know that. This is something I've heard Ajahn Sumedho talk about, is the importance of the little moments of bodhi as ways of moving you along. One of the ways this can manifest is if you're doing meditation and your mind is wandered off, and you've lost the thread, you're daydreaming, or you're caught in a memory or something, then at some point you remember what you're supposed to be doing and you pull yourself back. And a lot of times the value of that is lost because this self-criticism kicks in. You say, oh, I'm such a crappy meditator. I've gone off for 10 minutes daydreaming about something. You just kind of beat yourself up. But that moment of remembering, that's a moment of bodhi. At that moment you're fully awake. Oh, yeah, okay. And you can see a clear comparison between that awakened mind and the mind that was caught in delusion. That bodhi is being awake. Sati is remembering to be present. So when you have that moment of sati, you remember, oh yeah, that's where I am, that's who I am, that's what I'm doing. And to clearly notice what that feels like, that transition. Because that's a transition. That moment is a transition from a lower to a higher state of consciousness. You can build on that. You can take that as a example, as a learning opportunity. This is what bodhi feels like. Sadhu, 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 animodaami.